is a game that you have to choose to play.
Man, that's what football's all about.
It was harder to get in an Auckland side than get into the Kiwi side.
We suffered from that look down your nose at the league fraternity sort of attitude.
If he had lived, we could have had a different game as a predominant game here in New Zealand. It could quite easily have been rugby league.
100 years ago, Auckland was an emerging city with a population of approximately 100,000. Amenities like water and electricity were being rolled out. The electric tramways, Grafton Bridge and the town hall were all brand new. Rugby was the game of the empire and a form of entertainment for the masses. But trouble and change were already stirring here and in the motherland.
A lot of the strongest clubs and the counties of Lancashire and Yorkshire broke away from the autocratic England Rugby Union, which was in charge of the game in England, of course, but also in New Zealand and Australia.
Working-class miners and the like in northern England lost a day's wages to play rugby, while organisers of their games reaped record profits.
And all they wanted was some compensation for time off work. And the rugby powers to be in London didn't want to know about it.
Eventually, a professional competition, the Northern Football League, got underway. 13 players a side, no lineouts, no rucks, no mauls. And in 1905, some curious spectators from New Zealand witnessed this bold new game. A rugby league reporting veteran who covered over 100 games in 44 years at the press, John Coffey has spent a lifetime studying New Zealand League.
Original All Blacks in 1905 saw some of this Northern Union game, as it was called. When they returned home, those All Blacks, a lot of them were broke and were out of work, and a few of them still retained that interest in this Northern Union game.
That interest might have fizzled out but for a Wellington postal worker and rugby player, Albert Baskerville. Intrigued with this new style of rugby, he organised a Kiwi tour of the Northern Union teams in England in 1907 and 8. His radical idea? Players would chip in for the cost of the tour, but receive a share of any profits.
So he had a pretty good idea on rugby sports as such, but he'd been talking to All Blacks that had been away on the 1905 tour. They mentioned this new game that was being played in the north of England called Northern Union.
So the first professional tour from New Zealand to the United Kingdom via Australia and Ceylon was arranged. The impressive side included 9 All Blacks. None had ever played the game before they set foot in England. Baskerville was banned from rugby matches and accused of chasing coin, but he and his team couldn't be stopped. They were dubbed the All Golds, an early slur that would later become a nickname used with reverence and pride. Former player turned board member and prolific rugby league historian Bernie Wood has penned a series of definitive histories of rugby league, including Auckland's 100 years, with co-writer John Coffey.
They were immediately banned for life from ever having anything to do with rugby union again. And when you look through the history of sport in this country, you'll find that rugby league is the only sport that indeed had a life ban placed on them from another sport.
The 9-month tour was deemed a huge success, with the All Golds winning 19 out of 35 games. For the players, now banned from union, there was no choice but to make this new sport take off in New Zealand.
There was an initial setback. The organiser, Albert Baskerville, died of pneumonia in Brisbane on the way home. So there was initially a lack of organisation, but the remaining All Golds arranged for matches between Wellington and Auckland in 1908, and the seeds of what became the Auckland Rugby League were sown there.
From the outset, the Auckland sporting public became very interested in this new sport right from when the first games were played.
By 1909, clubs were being formed, and it was inevitable that the Auckland Rugby League would have to be formed to administer a club competition.
The original clubs were Devonport United, City Rovers, Newton City Rangers and Ponsonby United. Games were competitive from the start. The crowds were encouraging and newspaper reporters were enthusiastic, even if most were still figuring out the rules. The local club competition was underway, and Auckland representative teams played visiting teams from around the country, as well as Australia and England. With rugby league gaining in popularity, competition between the two codes began to intensify.
The rugby union actually had a habit of, if there was a rugby league game scheduled, hiding a couple of teams in the changing sheds a bit earlier in the afternoon and then racing onto the field as the league guys arrived and said the ground's not available, sorry. So there was one day when the North Shore Albions were having a rugby league match against the Fire Brigade for charity purposes, and the rugby union had this trick, and within 5 minutes there were 4 teams on the one field, 2 trying to play rugby union, 2 trying to play rugby league, and apparently it ended up in a Donnybrook.
For 100 years, league and rugby have tussled over which is the better game, the better test of skill. And while rugby is still the sport of choice of 145,000 New Zealanders, there are 22,000 passionate leagueies who have no doubt what sets this game apart.
You know, I've played both and I enjoy both. I prefer rugby league. I think the rules in rugby league are much more simple and just allow for a clearer understanding by both the spectator, the players, and also the referee.
The physical confrontation, I think, was something that sort of challenged. You know, the whole challenge of rugby league was completely different to what rugby union was back in the day when we were playing. Might have changed a little bit now, but not that much, I don't think.
If you look at a rugby game, a scrum goes down. And I did look at one recently, actually, and the scrum went down and it was 5 minutes to go to the 80th minute. From 75 to 80 minutes, so many scrums went down, they collapsed, they broke up, reformed, etc., reformed. And finally the buzzer went, it was 80 minutes and they walked off. I thought, oh, what a shocking game.
Te rerekētana o te riki ki te hutupōro. Wahua hōhau te mātakitaki hutupōro nā te mea ko nā rārangi waho, a whiu mai te pōro, wa ko titi te pōro, kua tau rānei ko te nonoke, ana kua pauge te tāma ki te whakatika-tika i te nonoke. Ana, ka pau te hau ki te mātakitaki ati, ka hōhā ki te mātakitaki ati nā nonoke e whakatau ana, kua tau, kua tuki, kua tau, kua tuki, kua tau, kua tuki. Te hutupōro riki. If you
want an all-action game, it's got to be rugby league. I think the only other sport on the planet that compete with it would be ice hockey for speed and collision.
For me, sort of growing up watching rugby union, even though I love watching rugby union, you know, there's a lot of kicking, stop-start going on in there. So I think for me, the free-flowing side of it was important for me to play league.
Rugby league is just, you know, it's so fast. The balls are in play so often. There's very little downtime. The speed of the game is great, and there's more opportunity for all players on the paddock from both sides to get their hands on the ball, be near the ball more often in the game.
But what is it about this game that has captured the imagination of Māori and Pacific Islanders and their communities for 100 years? What inspires these weekend warriors? The rapid success of rugby league in the early years of the 20th century would ultimately prove to be its downfall, and World War I would provide the turning point. While union halted competitions during the Great War, league continued to play, putting on charity fundraisers and building community spirit in difficult times. Star All Black Carl Ufferson had sensationally switched codes, and league's popularity was now so great that the union was forced to act, hoping to reverse a tide of declining spectators and empty stands. Their response would prove to be decisive. The rugby union issued a general amnesty for those wishing to return to the game after the war, and Carl Ufferson was welcomed back to the All Blacks. So strong was Iffuson's star power that his switch back to union, along with rule changes to give the game more pace, diminished the league's threat to be the #1 game.
He was basically so good. He was promised inclusion in the Invincibles team of the mid-20s, and in fact his selection was due to be announced when the message came from the English Rugby Union to the New Zealand Rugby Union that in no circumstances would Carl Iffuson be welcomed in England, so don't include him.
I think it was inevitable that rugby union would emerge successful if it was a race between the two, because it still had the money, because it refused to give it to the players, which is one reason why it all started. It still had the influence with the government, the local bodies, the grounds and the schools. So I think rugby league was really hitting its head against a brick wall.
The rugby union historians that John and I often talk to about the games are the first ones to admit that it hadn't been for the First World War, we could have had a different game as a predominant game here in New Zealand. It could quite easily have been rugby league.
League might have lost the battle with rugby, but the war raged on, nowhere more so than in the hearts and minds of Māori and Pacific Islanders, who would soon change the very white working-class face of league for good. Two people instrumental in the development of rugby league with Māori were Steve Watene and Jim Rukutai. To this day, Rukutai is the youngest ever Kiwi coach. Māori weren't new to league. In fact, at the same time as the original All Golds tour, an all-Māori team crossed the Tasman to try the new game against the Aussies in 1908. But still, it took the visionary leadership of a few key people later on to drive uptake of the game at home. Dale Husband has rugby league coursing through his veins. Coached by his mum, he played league from boyhood. His family's passion for the game goes a long way back.
Now, my grandfather, Steve Watene, was a pretty accomplished rugby player and had come up from the Thames region and was apparently working for the Department of Labour. His boss was Jim Rukutai. He said, "Steve, come on over and play rugby league because George Nepier's got dibs on the All Black jersey and you'll probably stand a better chance of making national selection if you play rugby league." Well, more than that, Grandpa ended up not just playing rugby league but also dating Jim Rukutai's daughter, and they eventually got married and had 14 children between them. So, you know, our family's been entrenched in league ever since.
Kiwi international Steve Watene, the first Māori to captain his country, inspired the development of the mostly Māori Manukau team. Within a year of its formation, the team incredibly won Auckland's premier grade prize trophy, the Fox Memorial, in 1936.
He went on a tour around through the lands that he's from, mainly around the east coast to Te Whanau Apanui. And because he was a confident bilingual speaker, a very good orator in both languages, he went and met with the Karaua and Kuia at various marae and asked if they would allow some of the young men to come to Auckland with him to strengthen the Manukau club. And so we had this team in the 1930s, predominantly made up of Māori players, who came and swept all aside in their first time in the Auckland Championship. They won that championship, and many of those families still live in and around the Manukau region as a result of his overtures to those old people all those years ago.
Legendary Ngāti Parau All Black George Napier, who switched to league in 1935, also played for Manukau and was involved in one of the Māori League team's most famous victories. Napier's example showed that the appeal of league for Māori was more than just the free-flowing nature of the game. The ability to earn a living by playing was a vital point in league's favour for this rugby legend, allowing him to support a family in the farm back home.
1937, Maori had a sensational victory, 16 points to 4 from memory, over the visiting Australian rugby league team. And George Napier captained that side. And indeed in that Maori team was a chap called George Mitchell, who in fact was a Samoan. But there was no pathway for Samoan, no pathway for the Pacific Islands. But at every opportunity, Maori encouraged the Pacific Islanders to play rugby league and included them in Maori teams.
Economic expansion combined with labour shortages in the 1960s and 70s led to a huge demand for unskilled labour, especially in Auckland. That demand was largely filled by immigrants from the Pacific Islands and Māori moving in from rural areas. These newcomers to the Big Smoke were immediately attracted to the pace and impact of rugby league. Hemana Waka, Ngai Tūhoi, is a sports broadcasting veteran of more than 20 years.
I roto I tāmaki makaurau ake tūturu nā nauri I whānau tonu mai konei. Kāre noho I roa, te retunu tā rātau nā kaunua te ki te tākara hutu pōro riki. Nā, me he mea koe te kitei nā karapu katoa ia nei I roto o tāmaki makaurau, he rahi nauri kai te tākara hutu pōro riki. Hea hai, nā te mea koe rā te tākara tino pāre kareka kia rātau, kareka I rereke ake kia tāu I te Māori. Kaha tā rātau tuki o rātau kaha katoa, o rātau whakaaro, me te tautako anō a o rātau whānau ki nā uri ko kuhua te ki roto I nā hutu pōro riki. Nā karapura I roto o tāmaki makaurau.
Part of an iconic league family in Tonga in New Zealand, Dwayne Mann played and captained at the highest level. He's now coach of the Bay Roskilde Vikings.
Because of the contact, because it's a team sport as well, you know, we're physically, Māori Polynesian players are suited to the game. It's a game where there's flair both in attack and defence, and it is, you know, I guess the essence of being in team and the culture within the clubs itself too that exists around not only within Auckland but also other regions around the country. There is a distinctive rugby league culture and psyche. It's grassroots, it's blue collar. And that's the attraction for down-to-earth, soul-of-the-earth people.
Stacey Jones is an international star of league who's returned to his roots, this year coaching Point Chevalier Pirates.
Because Polynesians and Māoris develop into big boys at a young age, whereas probably the European boys don't develop until they get a bit older. So I think that's why these Pacific Islanders and Māoris love the game, because they're big at a young age and can dominate.
Starting at Manukau in the 1980s, Clayton Friend had a colourful, high-flying career playing for Auckland, the Kiwis, New Zealand Māori and overseas.
It's human nature to play to win, and if you've got someone huge, as opposed to a little, whether he be a little Māori or Islander or Pākehā, the big guy, in a sense, is going to win. Give it to the big boy. He's going to win, and we've played with that for years now.
Involved with league all his life, Steve Buckingham personifies the weekend warrior. He works for a living, but has played 10 finals with the Mount Albert Lions. He's now their coach.
Some of us white boys used to really struggle. I mean, when I was growing up, I couldn't compete with them until I was probably 16, 17, when I sort of caught up with the growth. They're just naturally built well. They love to run with the ball. They love being physical. And I think that's all the attributes sort of required to make good rugby league players.
It's tough, it's not for the faint-hearted, you know. I only ever played one game, that was a social game, and I couldn't walk for a week, so I give that away.
By the middle of the century, communities of hard-working people all over Auckland, including Māori and Pacific Islanders, were dedicating their weekends to rugby league. And there was just one ground they all called home. The story of Auckland Rugby League cannot be told without paying homage to one of the sport's most famous stadiums, Carlaw Park, a small, intimate ground in central Auckland purpose-built in 1921 on the site of a former market garden. It evokes memories and passion like no other stadium. Named after the first Auckland Rugby League chairman, James Carlaw, it would go on to be the spiritual home of Auckland and New Zealand Rugby League for 8 decades.
In actual fact, it was a dump. Had a poor playing surface, the facilities were Z-grade facilities, they were terrible, but it had an atmosphere that could not be duplicated anywhere in New Zealand.
Oh, there was some fantastic games, and so that captured the imagination. One day, would I ever get the chance to run out on Carlaw Park?
Run out he did, as a player for Auckland and New Zealand from the late 1960s. Mike McLennan spent years sharing his knowledge with clubs like Mount Albert Lions, Northcote Tigers and Lancashire's St Helens. Peter and brother Te Ropati are 2 of 5 brothers who between them played at every level of the game.
Just the atmosphere, everything about it was fantastic, you know, and that's from having played on it to wanting to get along on a Thursday night when training's finished at Otahu, wanting to get in the car with your mates and head straight to Carlo Park because there was a night game on, and it would be straight over to the back of the train tracks, straight over the train tracks, and straight through the hole in the fence.
Yeah, I remember actually when I was about 10 years of age sneaking into the ground because I don't think we ever paid. There's always a hole in the fence somewhere.
And if there was no hole in the fence because they were clever enough to patch it up, it would be climb over the fence.
Or you knew one of the gatekeepers to let you in. But yeah, this time I think we snuck over the fence just on the railway stand there. And it was a test match against Australia. And I remember there was about 26,000 people, which doesn't sound a lot these days, but cramming that amount of people into Carlo Park really created a very unique atmosphere. And I just remember watching the game and just thinking, I want to be part of this.
I used to love going and standing at the back of the railway stand, and you'd go behind the old wooden louver windows and you'd listen to the pre-game talk and the half-time talk and the post-game talk and colourful language. You'd squeeze in between the adults' bodies if you could try get in there.
Some of the language that was coming out of the dressing rooms at different times was certainly not the sort of thing you'd like your kids to hear, but that in itself created its own attraction.
One of Auckland League's most famous exports, Graham Lowe cut his teeth coaching right here at Carlaw Park.
Outside the dressing room windows, there'd be dozens and dozens or hundreds of people listening at times to what the coaches had to say, and the stamping on the floor of the players warming up prior to going out on the field, the sprigs on the floor was just, if you were privileged to hear the sprigs on the floor underneath Carlaw Park, you heard the beat of a drum that cannot be repeated anywhere in the world.
Aucklander Dean Bell had a glittering career offshore, winning top honours from legendary English club Wigan before returning home to captain the Warriors.
Even now, you don't really smell it these days too much, but liniment, that just evokes memories of Carlaw Park and, in the change rooms. You could see people outside of the windows of the change rooms listening to listen to what everybody was saying in there, and and then you get the call to come out of the tunnel, and just standing there, just facing the opposition, so it was quite daunting really, and then just obviously the atmosphere as you ran out, it was pretty electric.
Ka muti toku tākaru te pōro ri ki ka haere au ki te whaiwhai haere i nā mahi I roto o Carlaw Park ki te whakapāho. Anei, kunei ka kite au te nākau nui me te wairua o te tapu o Carlaw Park. Karekau he papa tākaru i tuats I roto o Aotearoa whānui tonu.
Great memories going there as a kid. Sometimes got the opportunity to play at half-time of the main game, albeit only sort of 5 minutes.
Playing at Carlaw Park at half-time, that was a massive day. You only had like 5 minutes, but it seemed like a lifetime.
When you talk about Carlaw Park, I've been very honoured. I've travelled the world, been to games all over the world, as a spectator, as assistant manager, manager to the Kiwis. Carlaw Park is right up there with the best of them. The atmosphere, you can't buy it.
And here's the traditional haka.
And the Tammany Cousins in the front row.
Crowds and players were inextricably linked, and not just after the game. Des White, a record-breaking fullback of the 50s and 60s, recalls.
Well, they could see you, and if you made a mistake or you backed off or you chickened out on a tackle, etc., you would really cop it.
Yeah, I remember one on the sideline having a crack at Joe, and my mum getting involved, and nearly, trying to slap this guy because there was a spectator having a crack at Joe, and a player was trying to have a crack at Joe, and mum's leaning over the fence to have a crack at the player who was trying to have a crack at Joe, but everyone sat on top and you couldn't hide.
Well, party is going to come on by the looks.
The stadium, the grandstands were just right on the field. You could feel every tackle when you sat in the grandstand and watched the games, and you could hear, the crowd get stuck into the opposition.
It wasn't probably the flashiest stadium in the world, but at the same time it had atmosphere all of its own. And we knew where the family was sitting. They all sat in the same place on the concrete stand there. So if we didn't play very well, they'd let us know about it.
There's a little distinct variances in the pitch work at one of the field in the right-hand corner rolls up and slightly banks up, and so if you know how to kick the ball or run an opposition to that side of the corner, it can make it hard or easy for them. But mainly, it was intimidating because the crowd were close and the crowd was vocal. And the good thing too, when you played there, most of the times you had an Auckland ref.
And so now a penalty to Auckland right in front of the uprights.
I think the referee certainly helped them to win the game, and the last 3 penalties in particular were for things I've never seen before on a football field.
Carlaw Park was one of the most used test venues anywhere in the rugby league world, hosting an impressive 68 tests before crowds as big as 28,000. Its facilities were what most would call unique. And if the closeness of the crowd or the referees made it tough for visiting teams, they soon learned that they also had to contend with the state of the pitch.
Well, unfortunately, it was in a hollow, so if it rained in Auckland, and it rains in Auckland every day, then the ground would become wet and muddy. There was actually a French manager here in the early 1960s named Antoine Blaine, and his English was a bit restricted, but he walked out onto the ground, grabbed a heap of the turf and held it up and said, "Mud, mud, mud." That was the attitude. They hated playing there.
I think well, you could say that at the times they come over here, or the time of the year they came over here, they never came in toward early spring. It was always right in the middle of winter, and in June, July, and it was very, very heavy.
Well, we're talking mud, man. We are talking serious mud. And we had enjoyed some good success against touring teams. And it makes me wonder nowadays if we shouldn't pile on 1.5 foot of mud onto Mount Smart Stadium when we play against Aussie teams, and maybe we'll come up with some better results.
With or without metres of mud, this hallowed ground bore witness to some of the bloodiest competitions in New Zealand League and some of Auckland's greatest success.
Orchard out to Williams.
Carlaw Park in downtown Auckland played host to many famous club matches throughout the years. Fox Memorial, Lion Red Cup, Bartercard Cup, Rukutai Shield, Roop Rooster and the Stormont Shield have all been won and lost on this famous ground. But silverware aside, Auckland Rugby League supporters like nothing better than beating their Aussie counterparts.
But one comes to mind is when I was playing for North Sydney and we come over, I'm not sure what year, might have been 86, and we played an Auckland sort of combination team.
And it was $20,000 purse, winner takes all. And the invitation team, we had Tawara Nico and Ronnie O'Regan and a few other players come and join us. But that was, I think it was only one try apiece, might have been 11-8, the final score, something like that.
The Aussie team, my mates and that, they're all going, oh yeah, no, this is going to be a pushover and, have fun and that. They were like on tour. And I'm going, man, I'm telling you, the boys are going to be turning up. He's better get serious. Anyway, half-time come, and there'd been heaps of fights and like nearly all in brawls and all that, and we're coming off the change room. I said, I told yous, and they were just big smiles on their face and says, man, that's what football's all about. We haven't had the chance to play that sort of footy for years. And, they just buzzed off it, man, and I'll never forget that.
One of the most famous track records in New Zealand sport belongs to the Auckland representative team, which over the years made Carlaw Park its fortress.
It was always the 5th test. They'd play 4 tests, whether it be Australia, Great Britain, France. The 5th test was always against an Auckland side, and very rarely did an Auckland side lose.
It was because that they had so many Kiwi players that had actually represented New Zealand.
And players who migrated from other corners of the motu. Tawara Nico was a star of New Zealand Rugby League in the 1990s. Today, he's a businessman and Kiwis selector.
I came from the Waikato and came to Auckland to play rugby league, and to become a better player, you had to come to Auckland to play. There was players like Neville Ramsey, Mark Horrow, Shane Horrow. We all left the Waikato to come to play in Auckland because we wanted to become players for the Auckland Rugby League team, but also to make the New Zealand side.
I wasn't good enough to play for Auckland when I played, but to get the coaching job of Auckland, I think that was obviously my top highlight. And when you coached Auckland, you had so much talent.
Auckland's record against foreign teams is one of the best in international sport. France, Great Britain and Australia all fell victim to an Auckland representative team, more than once. In 1977, Auckland achieved the remarkable record of defeating Australia, Great Britain and France in the same year.
It was harder to get in an Auckland side than get into the Kiwi side.
Well, I think people talk about, you know, pulling on jerseys and actually changing the way you feel. Certainly pulling on the Auckland jersey, I don't know, I suppose there was a certain sort of high level of expectation to live up to. So the pressure was always on, and I think it was obviously the biggest honour you can get is representing your country. But I tell you what, Auckland wasn't too far behind.
The fate of Carlaw Park was sealed in 1995 when the fully professional Warriors joined the Australian Winfield Cup and chose to play at the more modern Mount Smart Stadium. The dismantling of Carlaw Park was almost symbolic of how the landscape of local league was changing forever. It was the end of one era and the start of another, with proceeds from the sale of the park ensuring Auckland Rugby League is one of the most financially secure local sporting bodies in the country.
Oh, don't start me. You get the blood boiling. Carlaw Park. I loved it. I tried to save it and no one wanted to support it.
I've accepted the fact that there comes a time when dearly beloved grounds as Carlaw Park their time has come. Same thing has happened to Athletic Park in Wellington, and the same thing happened to Carlaw Park.
The people that used to say, oh, save Carlaw Park, they never used to go to the games. You know, absolute bullshit, mate. There's no question Carlaw Park is part of the folklore of rugby league in this country. No question. And I've savoured the moment there. Beautiful time. But, mate, you can't save it if it's not economical. And it was not economical, and the right decision was made to sell it.
Yeah, look, it's a shame that's gone now, because if that was the Warriors' home ground, you know, I'd say they'd never get beaten there.
And here they come.
The Warriors, first an Auckland team but soon a New Zealand team, was the first New Zealand side to be included in an elite international professional league. In this case, the Australian 16-team NRL.
Dean Bell will cherish and remember this magic moment.
For the first time, New Zealand Rugby League was more than just a weekend sport played, for the most part, between ourselves. Young players would now have a pathway for their careers that didn't include immigration.
Let's have a look at this. Great roar went up from 40,000 people. Parochial as they will be. It'll be up to the Broncos to weather the emotional storm of the first 10 minutes.
With the Warriors, a team dominated by Māori and Pacific Island players, entering the competition, New Zealand saw itself as the underdog, taking on the Australians at what had by then become their game, at least as far as public perception went on both sides of the ditch. For Kiwi League fans and top-level players alike, it was exhilarating stuff.
Oh, it was just a huge buzz. Yeah, it was a dream come true, really. The buzz around Auckland at the time, yeah, it's just amazing.
I was one of those fortunate ones, I think, to watch Terry and them play that first game at Ericsson back in '95, and for many people who had watched, you know, the Winfield Cup and all that sort of stuff, all of a sudden it was now part of your weekly diet. It was on your back doorstep. It was here. It had arrived.
But from the outset, the NRL, as a vehicle for top-end rugby league in New Zealand, has divided opinion among even the staunchest league supporters.
Well, there's no secret. When they were first mooted, I was anti it. I said we needed a good competition here in New Zealand. And, you know, that's still the case. We need a decent competition here. But, mate, have the Warriors been good for rugby league in New Zealand? Yes and no. It's a double-edged question, to be fair. But I think more yes than no.
Yeah, look, it can only be a good thing. I'm not too sure how the relationship has been over the years, because obviously the Warriors are a franchise. Their goal is to win an NRL premiership. But for them to do that, I think, you know, the Auckland Rugby League competition has to be strong.
I think obviously it's a good thing, but perhaps it hasn't been used as well as what it should have been to turn that good thing into a really good thing.
Professionalism has thrown down a challenge to the game and infrastructure of rugby league. And for weekend warriors involved at grassroots level, the knock-on effect has been profound. Rusty Matua was a well-respected Otahuhu player in the late 80s and early 90s. He's now coach at the biggest league club in the country, Manurewa Marlins.
When you speak about changing the dynamics, we felt a huge effect at club level, especially initially because it was like all the air got sucked out of club football. Everything was just gravitating towards the Warriors. So they've taken all the media and all the exposure, all the marketing and all the promotion. Everything revolves around the Warriors now. And I think it's a shame in a way also too that we've also lost that support and that interest that we had in our Auckland team at the time.
Ahakoa koe nei te rautau o te tākaro hutuporo riki ki roto o tāmaki makaurau. I roto I tēnei rautau, kua pua wai ke mai te kākono mai rano. I tīmata ke mai te whakapapa o tāua I roto kei o tātou uri I tērā rautau rano. Nā reira, kare o ku āwana mō tērā. Ahakoa, he iti noho tātou kai konei kai o tērā ai Aotearoa nohoana. Nā re ko te mana, ko te kaha, ko te ihi, ko te wehi, kai ahi te reiri ake. Kai te waimaria tātou ko nā karapu ke kai reira, kai te whāngai atu I nā tohutohu, kai te whāngai atu nā pūtea ki wā tātou tā tamatoa, kai te tākorero te nā karapu o te NRL. Nā reira, mai reira, ka taheno tātou ka orite. E nari nā tau pahemo kimuri, I te wā e tākorona nā tāngata pēnei ia Phil Orchard mānena, ia Robert Orchard mānena, ia Tāwera Nikau mānena, e hoa, he raru ke nā te mea, kore rawa tātou eke ki te taumata o Aotearoa ki nā karapu nunui o ahi te reiria. Nā reira, me mihi atu tātou ki nā karapu kahake, kai ahi te reiria e tākoro maina, kai ingarani e tākoro maina, ana kua kite koe ia nena, te maho nā karapu, he kanohi paraone kai roto I nā karapu o te NRL, arano atu te nunui. Rua te kautau ki muri, I tinoho rātou. Ko nā Hugh McGanns, ko nā Kurt Sorensen, I tākoro mona Cronulla Sharks, I tinoho rātou. Ia nena, ia karapu, ko ki tate koe, he kanohi Māori, he kanohi rāne o Nauri o te moana nui kai reira e tākorana. Nā reira, he mea nui tēnei, he mea pai tēnei ki a tāu? Ai.
A familiar face to many in South Auckland, Rusty's brother Charles Matua is leading the charge to install league as an official school sport.
I nā kiau nei he painga to te Warriors, nā te mea e taia nā rangatai o tēnei au ki te uru atu ki roto I nā tīma pera. Pena I hea nā rata te whai te ara mo te NRL, ko tērā te huara I tika maratai.
I think it's probably a few years where club league struggled with them, but in general now I think they're really looking to help the clubs. I know we get a few under-20s boys back every now and again to help our top side. And I guess they're interested in helping to develop the game now, whereas back in the past it was about plucking the best players out and maybe not putting something back. So I think they've got the right attitude now towards their club footy. They need to develop club footy, and in the long run that'll help them. And in general, the Warriors are a good thing for the game. They keep our profile high, and you know, like I say, keeps the kids wanting to come back for more.
But turning those dreams into reality for cash-strapped clubs is no easy feat.
At our grassroots level, we really struggle. For us, Manurewa Marlins in particular, you know, it's our 50th Jubilee this year. We've got 53 teams, the biggest club in New Zealand. But it's a struggle every year just to outfit our teams, just to get them onto the field. But the remarkable thing is that if we had more resources, we could have even more teams and grow to even be a bigger club.
For people like Rusty, league is more than a game. It's a deeply held philosophy and a hard-fought way of life.
And one of the things that we use in regards to our boys is that we don't play for money, we play for mana. You know, we've spoken to our boys in regards to money. We don't have any money. If you want to get paid to play rugby league, you need to get yourself into a good enough position to go to the NRL or the Super League. That's where you'll get paid, gentlemen. And we're just giving them an opportunity here to develop their football, to be part of a really positive culture, you know, of guys who want to improve their football, improve themselves, and become better league players. And that's the beauty about grassroots rugby league, is that you're seeing guys there who play for the love of the game.
I think every young guy playing rugby league would like to be a Warrior. I'm sure of that. But of course, you go on to the fact that scouts are in New Zealand from Australia looking for the talent that we've got. And boy, we don't see a lot of the talent. We see it all right in playing for some other club in Australia.
We never made a decision that we wanted to play professional rugby league. We never made a decision that we wanted to go somewhere and be paid to play.
You've got a generation of parents now who see it as a different experience for their young ones. If they're any good, they're thinking, well, straight away they're counting, and you've got agents ringing them left, right and centre, and clubs calling, and people telling them how good they are, and maybe their focus, the parents, on the kids is pushing them more professionally, I think. Whereas I grew up, you know, even to the last day, I never thought about money, or I never thought about it as a job or as anything, as a hassle, apart from the fact that it was a privilege to be able to play this beautiful game that we play.
You could probably throw up 1,000 kids right now and you'll probably find 999 will come up with this line, I want to be a pro footballer. Yeah, I don't know if many in our day made that decision early on, whether they're playing juniors, 18, 20s or whatever, that was, yeah, footy was something you just did around life, and it was just part of not everything.
Well, I've been an administrator for 5 decades, or over 5 decades, and, you know, every day I learn something new.
Kathy Friend is a cornerstone of Māori and Auckland Rugby League, first as a parent, then an administrator and now a board member. Hers is a league family, which includes her son Clayton Friend, her brother Cameron Bell, who played and then coached Auckland in the late 1980s, and his son Dean Bell.
I think I was looking at the stats a couple of weeks ago for Auckland transfers out of Auckland, and I think we were up to about 400 going mainly to Australia. I think that Auckland Rugby League know that they've got a battle on their hands. They don't want to stop these players from going, but it's very important that we still offer the very best services to them that we possibly can. There's a lot more we could do for our clubs. I know that my family keeps saying to me, but what are you doing for the clubs? Because the clubs are suffering at the present moment, and that is quite true. I think that that's another area that we have to look at. We have to kind of work with the clubs, which we're trying to do just at the moment, and if we can put things together, that we're going to survive for another 100 years.
Everyone agrees that the future of rugby league lies with the young. But what support for their playing ambitions do they find at their first training ground, school? Rugby league has had to overcome many obstacles over the years. The players are tough not because they're sporters, but because despite the hurdles in their way and despite choosing to play a game that plays second fiddle to another, the players stand united in their love of the game. Nothing typifies this more than the opposition many faced at secondary schools.
Here we are 100 years on, and the extent of, or the influence of rugby league in schools hasn't advanced that much.
Certainly up until rugby turned professional 20 years ago, we suffered from that look down your nose at the league fraternity sort of attitude, and that permeated most of our schools.
It's still in many ways because of the class system, in my view. That was the problem right way back in the old days. You would never think would happen in New Zealand, because I know all my rugby union mates, they certainly aren't worried about class issues whatsoever.
The rugby union had extremely strong influence over a lot of areas, such as the government, the local bodies in relation to playing fields, and the schools.
Once I got to college, I became aware that it was a problem if you were a rugby league player, because despite what the teachers might tell you now and despite what's politically correct, if you played rugby league, you were on the outer at school. You were expected to play rugby union on a Saturday, which I refused to. I played rugby league.
It happened to me. I had to clean the toilets and the playground and everything because I wouldn't play for the first 15. And it, you know, I used to swim for the school and run for the school, cross country and everything like that. And yet I got penalised for not wanting to play. Well, I was adamant I wasn't going to play a game where the spectators touched the football more than the players.
And you were penalised because they did not want rugby league to grow, and it was a pity that that continued like that for years and years and years.
They got me into the office one day and says, well, you got to play rugby. I says, I can't, I was real quiet then, and they pulled out the strap and threatened me with the strap. Says, you're playing rugby on the weekend. I says, no, I'm not. And I jumped out the window and ran all the way back to Otahu. And I just got home, knackered, and my mum turns up, just as I was going in the drive. What are you doing home from school? And I told her, she says, get in the Humber. No, Mum, get in the Humber. We're going back. No, man, do we have to? She says, get in the Humber. Anyway, so we, on the old Humber 80, went all the way back. I think it took us an hour. I think I ran it quicker. But we got back and, Mum straight into the office, dragged the principal and deputy principal, Mr. Bates, I think he was, and just tore stripes off him. And made me so proud that even though at the time it was scary.
Embarrassed.
Yeah, embarrassed. I think it was the Humber 80, I don't know.
But I think they used pressure. They used lots of pressure on the young ones. And I think that, the way he went about it, I believe, this is the headmaster, he asked Clayton what did his father do and was he involved in league? And he said, well, yes, he is. And he says, oh, well, what about your mother? And he says, well, she's even more involved. And the promise that he semi-made to Clayton was that, if you come over to rugby, well, I could probably make you an All Black.
Deep down, if people are genuinely honest, there is still a downgrading and a looking down of rugby league. And many of my mates who play rugby union say, oh, well, you leagueies got a chip on your shoulder. Well, I've got a chip on both shoulders, and I've got reason to.
A lot of pupils at the schools want to play rugby league. They want to try it because they see it on TV, so they actually want to try it, even in schools with a huge rugby union history.
School principals in the Auckland region and indeed nationwide need to wake up that whatever codes young people take a shine to, let's give them every opportunity to participate.
League has a 100-year history of fighting for its existence, and looking towards the future, one option is to predict more of the same. The alternative involves working together to change the ways of the past, and in some corners of Auckland, that's already begun.
I ngā tau ko pahurea ke I te tau 2005, I timataria I mātou o ngā mātou o te kāhui iwa, o ngā kura Māori o Tāmaki ki te whakatū I tēnei momo whakataitai, ara ko te mā hepo, hei ara mo ngā tauira e hia nei te whai I tēnei momo huarai. Ko tētai o mātou hautipua I whai tūranga ki roto I te kapa o Newcastle I te rātou, mai tō mātou whakataitai, ka uru atu ia ki roto I tō mātou tīma rangatira, katai ka tākoro mātou ki te whakataitai āmotu mō ngā whutiporo riki, I reira ka kitea mai I etai o ngā selectors mai Newcastle, I aia he tākoro ana, en tā rātou I heia ki te tango mai I tērā hautipua ki a tango hia, e ia ki Newcastle I tēnei tau.
Māngere were at Southern Cross campus. They've decided this year that they're not going to play first 15 rugby. They'll play no rugby. They've said that we're only going to play league. And over the last few years, they've had a first 15 that's been quite competitive, I think. But they've made a decision that their school's a rugby league school, their kids are rugby league kids, so they're going to be playing rugby league and rugby league only.
You actually got to offer kids a pathway. It can't be just ad hoc rugby league games. What's at the end of it? Where can those players go? It's a captured audience. That's the beauty about having rugby league in schools. And if they don't become rugby league players, the worst they can be is rugby league fans, and that'd be great for our game as well.
Ka haere tonu rātou I runga I te kore, engari ko tērā tētai o ngā painga, ko te whanaungatanga ki te whakahaere I ngā momo kimi pēra. I wainga I ngā kapa, I wainga tonu I ngā kura, I wainga hoki I ngā mātua o ngā tamariki I roto I ngā kura.
While rugby league hasn't always had the top-down support of institutions and schools on its side, it has enjoyed a steadfast link with families, a link passed down for generations. Many of the city's clubs and club grounds have been created and nurtured by families giving up their own time over countless weekends. Some of our most famous players have come from rugby league families.
Rugby league has always been a family game. Families can play for the same club, often brothers. Rapatis, for example, the Bailey brothers can play for the same team in the same club. And so there's always been a big family element in the different clubs right throughout the rugby leagues, right throughout the whole of New Zealand.
Rugby league is a game that you have to choose to play. It's not a game that you're forced to play at school, you're offered at school. It's a game you choose. So if you've chosen it, it's not surprising that other members of your family have chosen it too.
I got started in rugby league at the age of 5, playing for the Wesley Club in Mount Roskill. And the reason I went to rugby league was my dad was a rugby league man.
Ko te ahua o te whanaungatanga, koira te tino pūtaki o etai o ngā whānau, pērā i ngā whānau o ngā Irish, ngā whānau o ngā Bells. Ki te rātou i a rātou, i o rātou tuakana e tākoro ana i tēnei kemuara ko te whutuparo riki. Ko tā rātou tino ia te whai i tērā huara i hoki.
I think first and foremost it's the togetherness. Rugby league people are very, very friendly, and I think it comes from there.
And as I say, you can't look back, you look forward. And I see at the end of the tunnel for rugby league, I see a pot of gold. You know, we will never overtake rugby, but we will be a close second, and I'll be happy with that.
Today, 100 years after the birth of rugby league in Auckland, the game is part of the fabric of this city's sporting culture, reaching across cultural, economic, gender and geographic divides. It calls hundreds of players and their families to get involved at every level. The future for these weekend warriors is looking good for a second 100 years.